8 years ago, my first love, Zyla Garcia, dumped me. Right in front of me. She threw herself into the arms of a rich scion named Brett Salway. She said condescendingly, "Kieran, you asked me to wait for you for 3 years. But how many 3 years does a woman have?" I begged her desperately, but she remained unmoved. Brett even ordered someone to pin me to the ground and force me to finish a bottle of red wine before letting me leave. "You should thank me, Kieran. Otherwise, you would never have the chance to drink such expensive wine in your life." Brett sneers. I watched as they got into a luxury car and drove off. 8 years later, I am one of the most powerful figures in this city, and I run into them again. After I got off the plane, my assistant Reagan Judd drove me straight to Smith Hot Springs Club. I was the owner of this club, and I mostly used it as a place to host my elite clients. The threshold for registering as a member of my club was quite high. While I made money from running the club, it also helped filter the clients who were worthy enough to do business with me. At the same time, I could help connect them with others. Because of that, many elites of the business world like to come here, sit around, talk about life, and casually gather the latest information. That was how information gaps came about, and through them, I gradually became an untouchable new figure with immense influence in the financial world. Mr. Smith, Mr. Salway, and Mr. Cooper of Rogmeyer are here tonight. Would you like to see them now? Reagan asked. I rubbed my temples and replied, "Okay, ask them to come over." I had just gotten off the plane. After soaking in a hot spring and grabbing a bottle of premium wine, I made my way toward room 308, the private room where we had agreed to meet. Just as I was about to push the door open, someone grabbed my arm. Well, if it isn't Kieran Smith. Weren't you supposed to make something of yourself? How did you end up as an errand boy selling wine? It was Brett Salway, the rich scion, who humiliated me 8 years ago. A group of people stood behind him, one of whom was Zyla Garcia. Even though 8 years had passed, she was still as beautiful as ever. The only difference was that she had a faint, sorrowful frown. I raised an eyebrow and smiled. "Yeah, the commission is high. After all these years, you really haven't improved at all. Back then, Brett rewarded you with a bottle of wine, and you were over the moon." The one speaking was Brett's lackey, Harry Holt. He shoved me rudely with ill intent, pushing me straight into room 308. Unexpectedly, no one was inside. "This room has been reserved. You should go to another one," I said, trying to stop them. But Brett shoved me aside and sneered. "What are you afraid of, Kieran? Let me show you something. This is the best room in the club, and I have booked it tonight. Don't sell wine for tonight. Serve me. Be our waiter here." As he spoke, he pulled out a bill and stuffed it into my chest pocket. "Go on, pour us some wine." Harry grew excited too. "Yeah, pour it. You're in luck tonight. Seeing as we're old friends, we'll buy each bottle you drink." "This wine is very expensive," I said. The bottle I held had been shipped from a Kieran vineyard. Each one of these cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Harry didn't recognize its value, but Brett did. He scoffed and said, "If you're selling, you should have the right attitude. Do you think my family can't afford it? Open it." Since he insisted, I had no choice but to uncork the wine. Brett pulled Zyla with him to sit down. Then he poured her a glass of wine while urging me to bring food. I wanted to leave, but Reagan had said those 2 clients still wanted to talk to me. Seeing as they had waited for me for 2 months, I couldn't very well refuse. So I could only stay. I stood beside Zyla and poured her wine. At the sight of this, Harry mocked me. "Look at that. You have good judgment, Zyla. Good thing you chose Brett back then. Otherwise, you'd probably be selling wine with Kieran right now." "Exactly. Maybe you'd even have to wear a bunny girl outfit." Brett chimed in. "They made fun of us without any regard." Zyla merely clenched her fists and said nothing. I smiled lightly in response. What was wrong with selling wine? At my club, every wine seller earned an annual salary of $300,000 plus full benefits. Wasn't that still better than working for some worthless people? But before I could say anything, Brett spoke first. "Kieran, it's the same as before. Finish this bottle, and I'll buy 2. How about it?" Harry laughed. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Don't just stand there. Hurry up. Drink. Come on." I shook my head. "I can't drink. I just took some medicine." In truth, I hadn't taken any medicine. I just didn't want to drink with them. In my circle, people like them couldn't even get close to the outer perimeter of my club, let alone drink with me. Brett looked displeased as he patted my face. "Kieran, you've got quite an attitude. You're selling wine here, but you refuse to drink, huh? Does your boss know?" I replied steadily, "He does. The boss said we have full discretion to decide if we want to drink or not." Harry slammed the table and said, "You put on quite a convincing act. Your boss might have said that, but what he didn't say is that when your client is Brett, you will have to drink no matter what." Brett liked what Harry said. He lifted his chin at me and continued, "You won't be able to save enough to buy a bottle of this even after working your whole life, you country bumpkin. Come on, pour the wine." Harry immediately played along. Brett is right. Who knows? Maybe he'll enjoy it. The only fitting job for a poor loser like him is to stand here and serve us. The two of them chortled mockingly. I looked at Zyla. She remained silent the whole time as she sat beside Brett. Occasionally, she glanced at me. Her eyes carried a hint of resentment and a trace of unease at my suffering. I glanced at Brett and noticed that neither of them wore rings. 8 years had passed. Why weren't they married? How many 8 years did a woman even have? Zyla really wasn't thinking straight. I poured her a glass and was about to leave when Harry grabbed me. He jeered. Don't go. Didn't your club train you to do your job? The guests are still here. Where do you think you're going? Give us some entertainment like singing or dancing, or whatever. Brett's eyes lit up. Right. I remember that you won a place in one of the college singing contests. You used your guitar skills to win over our campus belle. Isn't that right, Zyla? You fell for his pretty boy act back then, didn't you? Zyla showed a trace of embarrassment upon being suddenly pulled into Brett's arms. I smiled faintly, expecting her to mock or belittle me. But she said, no. Everyone looked at her. Zyla said seriously, Kieran never lied to me. I willingly became his girlfriend. At those words, Brett let out a cold snort. What's this? Are you reminiscing about the past now? Do you regret it? Let me tell you, even if you regret it, it's too late. I was a bit surprised. Had Zyla lost her mind? Or did she find out about my current status and was deliberately putting on a show? But that didn't make sense. I hadn't been back for 8 years. After being humiliated by Brett back then, I left and swore that I would make something of myself. Even though I was back, Reagan was the one managing the club. Other than my close confidants, no one knew who I really was. So what was going on with Zyla? Before I could figure it out, Harry walked over and patted my shoulder. We're talking to you, punk. Go on, sing something. You'd better entertain Brett. If he's happy, he'll give you a tip. You'll be hitting the jackpot if he does that. His group of friends grew excited as well. Yeah, hurry up. You're out here promoting wine. Stop holding on to your non-existent dignity. Sing a song. Either that or go on and dance. I flashed them a polite smile. I stopped doing that a long time ago. My health hasn't been great these past 2 years. My knee's injured, so I can't dance. As for singing, I'm sad to tell you that my voice is unable to do that anymore. A few years back, I drank too much at business events and ruined my voice. Thus, I couldn't sing anymore. The knee injury was real as well, as I'd been in a car accident. Brett immediately grew annoyed. Kieran, are you asking for trouble? You won't drink and you won't sing. Are you deliberately going against me? He shot his posse a look. Harry understood instantly and stepped forward with another guy to pin me down from both sides. Harry roared. How dare you oppose Brett, you pauper? You're asking for it. We're going to make you drink no matter what. As they spoke, they tried to force wine down my throat. I responded coldly. Brett, this is an exclusive club, not your home. Are you sure you want to cause trouble in this private room? Brett froze for a moment. Are you threatening me? I replied. Firstly, this room was already reserved, and the person who booked it wasn't you. This bottle of wine wasn't for you either. You forced me to open it and took over the room, and now you want to force me to drink? You'd better think carefully about the consequences. My words made them hesitate. Someone beside Brett said, I've heard the owner of Smith Hot Springs Club holds grudges. Also, only VIP clients can book room 308. Others spoke up one after another. Maybe we should just let it go, Brett. Yeah, I think this pauper is trying to set you up. He deliberately brought us here. Let's go somewhere else. We'll have plenty of chances to deal with this guy later. I broke free from them and rubbed my sore shoulder. Just then, Brett snapped back to his senses and slammed the table. What's there to be afraid of? My uncle and Mr. Cooper are hosting an important guest tonight, and this is the room they reserved. In other words, the Salway family booked this room. So, I'm free to use this room as I please. Harry immediately chimed in. Exactly. Why can't Brett use this room as he pleases? Kieran, you've got some nerve threatening Brett. Let's see if the club owner will back you up. Brett sneered. That's right. Either you finish the drink, or you bark like a dog for us. Otherwise, even if the club owner shows up, I won't give a damn. He became arrogant again, just like 8 years ago. But I was no longer the person I had been back then. I asked, Brett, what if I'm the VIP guest your uncle is hosting tonight? The room fell silent. After a moment, laughter erupted from everywhere. Brett laughed so hard his whole body shook. Harry and the others nearly collapsed onto the floor. Zyla looked at me with a complicated expression on her face. I shrugged. I knew they wouldn't believe me. Kieran, have you been reading too many novels? If you want to act tough like the male leads, you should at least have a better sense of your own worth. Exactly. If you're really Mr. Salway's VIP guest, I'll eat my shoe. Brett walked over and patted my face, this time with some force. My cheek stung slightly. He said scornfully, no matter who comes to help you today, you're not getting away. Forget it, Brett. He's just an employee. Why bother? Zyla suddenly said. I didn't expect that Zyla would step in to speak up for me. But at this moment, her words had the unintended effect of fanning the flames even more. Sure enough, Brett turned and grabbed her chin to force her to look right at him. Are you feeling sorry for him now? You're so shameless. If you feel bad for him, fine. You drink. Finish it, and I'll let him go. Before I could say anything, Zyla picked up the bottle and started drinking straight from it. Stop drinking, Zyla. There's no need to do this. I snatched it from her. She gripped my wrist. If I finish it, you can leave. Don't overestimate yourself. You can't win against them. She insisted on drinking, but I refused to let her. Brett grew impatient and shouted, Damn it. Quit acting all affectionate in front of me. Do you take me for a fool? Get lost. He shoved Zyla aside, grabbed the bottle, and poured it over my head. Neil, you worthless trash. I looked at him and sneered. Brett, you're going to regret this. How dare you still talk back? Beat him up. At Brett's command, Harry and the others lunged at me. I dodged sideways to avoid them. Harry bellowed furiously. Think you can dodge? Get over here. They moved in again. I grabbed the bottle and threw it forcefully to the ground. As the loud crash rang out, everybody froze. I said menacingly, None of you are leaving today. The next second, the door to the private room opened. An aged voice rang out. Who dares threaten the Salway family? Uncle Edmund. Brett's eyes lit up as he hastily pointed at me. It's him. I took a tissue, wiped my hands, and turned to face them. That's right. It was me. Edmund Salway was a man who carried his authority in the tilt of his chin and the expensive, albeit slightly ill-fitting, cut of his bespoke Italian suit. Stepped into room 308 with the heavy, deliberate tread of a patriarch who owned the ground he walked on. Behind him, a tall, sharp-eyed man in his late 50s, Mr. Cooper, the managing partner of Rogmeyer, followed looking slightly annoyed by the noise. Uncle Edmund. Brett's voice immediately lost its snarling edge, replacing it with a high, whined pitch. He practically stumbled over Harry Holt to reach his. Uncle. You came at the right time. Some lowlife wine seller took over your private room, smashed a bottle of your reserve, and threatened us. He even tried to lay hands on Zyla. Harry Holt and the rest of the lackeys nodded in frantic agreement, falling in behind Brett like a pack of stray dogs behind their alpha. That's right, Mr. Salway. Harry chimed in. He's been acting like he owns the place. He even had the nerve to claim he was the VIP you were hosting tonight. Edmund's brow furrowed, a thunderous expression settling over his face as he looked toward the center of the room. Who? In my own club. His voice died in his throat. The silence that followed was sudden, absolute, and heavy. Kieran did not move. He stood by the shattered remnants of the Kieran reserve, slowly wiping a thin stream of red liquid from his wrist with a white cloth. The wine, smelling of dark cherries and ancient oak, dripped from his dark hair onto his collar, but his posture was completely relaxed. His shoulders were straight, and his eyes, cold and dark as midnight stone, locked directly onto Edmund Salway's face. Beside Edmund, Mr. Cooper's eyes widened. He took a sudden, sharp breath, his hand dropping from Edmund's shoulder as if he had been burned. And Mr. Smith? Edmund's voice was barely a whisper. The color drained from his cheeks so rapidly that his face took on the gray, waxy texture of a corpse. Kieran. Mr. Smith. Uncle. Brett laughed nervously, though a faint prickle of sweat was starting to break out along his hairline. Why are you calling him that? He's just Kieran, the loser from college. He's an errand boy. Slap. The sound was like a whip cracking in the small room. Edmund's hand had connected with Brett's cheek with such force that the younger man was sent stumbling sideways, crashing into the low mahogany table. The glasses rattled violently, two of them tipping over and spilling their contents onto the plush carpet. Uncle. Brett gasped, clutching his reddening face, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sheer humiliation. Why did you? Shut your mouth. Edmund screamed, his chest heaving as he turned on his nephew, his fingers trembling with a rage that was driven entirely by terror. You brainless, arrogant piece of trash. Do you have any idea who you are talking to? Mr. Cooper stepped forward, completely ignoring the stunned group of young scions. He walked directly to Kieran, his head bowed in a deep, respectful angle. Mr. Smith, I apologize. We arrived early and were told you were on your way from the airport. I had no idea this boy was related to Edmund, let alone that they would dare. It's fine, Cooper, Kieran said, his voice quiet, steady, and carrying a low, vibrating resonance that made everyone in the room instinctively hold their breath. He tossed the stained tissue onto the table. You've been waiting for me for 2 months. I apologize for the delay. The welcoming committee here was rather thorough. Harry Holt looked as if he were about to faint. He took 3 slow, silent steps backward, trying to blend into the shadows of the doorway, but his knees shook. so violently he had to lean against the wall for support. Zyla Garcia sat frozen on the sofa. Her hands, which had been clenched tightly in her lap, had gone completely numb. She looked at Kieran, at the man who had once knelt in the mud of the university gates, begging her not to go, and realized that the person standing before her was no longer the boy she had left behind. He was the shadow that ruled the city's financial harbor. The door to room 308 opened again, and Reagan Judd, Kieran's personal assistant, stepped in. He took one look at the wine dripping from Kieran's hair, the shattered glass on the floor, and the trembling figure of Edmund Salway, and his expression instantly turned to one of professional, freezing efficiency. Behind him, four tall, broad-shouldered security guards in dark suits filed into the room, blocking the exit. Mr. Smith, Reagan said, stepping up to Kieran's side and presenting a fresh, dry hand towel. I have the security team outside. Shall I have them removed? No, Kieran said, taking the towel and drying his neck with slow, deliberate movements. Mr. Salway's nephew was very keen on buying the wine I was promoting tonight. I believe we should settle the bill before anyone leaves. He turned his gaze toward Brett, who was still cowering on the floor near the table, his face white, his arrogant posture completely shattered. Brett, Kieran said softly, walking over to the sofa and sitting down. Crossed his legs, looking down at the younger man with a calm, indifferent expression that was far more terrifying than anger. You said you'd buy 2 bottles for everyone I finished. I didn't finish the bottle, but you were kind enough to open it for me. Reagan, what is the current market value of the Kieran Reserve 1982? Reagan pulled out a slim digital tablet, his fingers tapping the screen. That particular bottle was one of only 12 remaining in our private cellar, Mr. Smith. It was imported from the Kieran estate last winter. The estimated value at auction is $450,000. Harry Holt let out a choked, whimpering sound. 450,000, Kieran repeated, nodding slowly. And of course, we have the damage to the room. The carpet is wool from the northern provinces, custom dyed. The table is solid cedar. The delay to Mr. Cooper's meeting. Cooper, what is the hourly rate for your consultation? Mr. Cooper offered a cold, humorless smile. For a merger of this scale? About 50,000 an hour, Mr. Smith. And we've been waiting here for 45 minutes. Let's round it up, Kieran said, looking at Edmund. $600,000, Edmund. Your nephew has had a very expensive 45 minutes. Edmund's hands shook so badly, he had to tuck them into his pockets to hide it. Mr. Smith, please. The boy is young, he doesn't know the rules of the club. He didn't recognize you. He didn't recognize me because he thought I was still the pauper he pinned to the ground 8 years ago, Kieran said, his voice dropping to a low whisper that seemed to chill the very air in the room. He thought because I wore a simple shirt, I was still the boy he could force to drink cheap wine. Tell me, Edmund, does the Salway Group have $600,000 in liquid assets? Right now? Edmund went completely still. The Salway Group had been struggling for 18 months. The only reason they were here tonight was to beg Mr. Cooper for a joint venture with Rogmeyer, a venture that was entirely dependent on Mr. Cooper securing an introduction to the mysterious owner of the Smith Hot Springs Club. And that owner was Kieran. Mr. Cooper, Edmund stammered, turning to the older man with a desperate, pleading look. The Rogmeyer merger. We've been preparing the paperwork. The merger is dead, Edmund, Mr. Cooper said, his voice flat and final. Rogmeyer does not do business with families who cannot control their own dogs. If Mr. Smith is displeased with you, then Rogmeyer is finished with you. He turned to Kieran, bowing slightly. Mr. Smith, I will wait for you in the lobby. Take all the time you need. With that, Cooper turned and walked out of the room, the security guards stepping aside just enough to let him pass before closing the gap once more. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Harry Holt and the other scions were practically pressed against the walls, their breath shallow, terrified that Kieran's gaze would land on them. Reagan, Kieran said, not looking up from his hands. Take the others out. Let them wait in the security office until the local police arrive to document the property damage and the physical assault. Yes, Mr. Smith, Reagan said. He signaled the guards, who immediately stepped forward and grabbed Harry and the other 3 young men by their collars, dragging them out of the room like sacks of flour. Harry tried to scream an apology, but a quick, firm grip from one of the guards silenced him instantly. Only Edmund, Brett, and Zyla remained. Kieran stood up, his wet clothes clinging slightly to his chest. He looked at Zyla, who was still sitting on the edge of the sofa, her face pale, her lips trembling. You haven't changed much, Zyla, Kieran said, his voice carrying a strange, soft melancholy. Still beautiful. Still watching from the side while others pay the price for your choices. Zyla's eyes filled with tears, a single drop spilling down her cheek. Kieran, I I didn't know. Of course you didn't, Kieran said, walking over to the window and looking out at the steaming hot springs below. If you had known, you wouldn't have let Brett pour that wine over my head. You would have been the first to bow, just like Edmund. That's not true, she cried, her voice cracking with a sudden desperate emotion. I tried to stop him. I drank the wine so he would let you go. You drank it because you still think of me as someone who needs your protection, Kieran said, his back turned to her. You still think of me as the boy who has no cards to play. But the truth is, Zyla, I've had the entire deck in my hand for 5 years. He turned around, his eyes locking onto hers. Why aren't you married? He asked, the question sudden and sharp. 8 years ago you told me a woman doesn't have many 3 years to waste. But you've spent 8 years with Brett, and there is no ring on your finger. Why? Zyla lowered her head, her shoulders shaking as she began to sob quietly. Edmund, seeing an opportunity, quickly stepped forward, his face desperate. Mr. Smith, the Garcia family has been in debt to us for 6 years. Brett's father held the mortgage on her family's estate. That's the only reason she stayed. She never wanted to be with him. She was just paying her father's debt. Kieran's eyes narrowed, a cold, dangerous light flashing in them. He looked at Brett, who was still cowering on the floor, his face white, his arrogant posture completely shattered. Is that true, Brett? Kieran asked, his voice very quiet. Brett didn't answer. He just clutched his face, his breathing shallow and rapid. Reagan, Kieran said, his voice flat. Find out which bank holds the Garcia estate mortgage. Buy it. By tomorrow morning, I want the Garcia family's debt transferred entirely to the Smith Group. Already on it, Mr. Smith, Reagan said, his fingers flying across his tablet. It will be completed before the banks open. Zyla looked up, her face filled with a mixture of shock and a sudden fragile hope. Kieran, you don't have to do that. I'm not doing it for you, Zyla, Kieran said coldly. I'm doing it because I dislike unpaid debts. 8 years ago, you sold your youth to the Salway family for a handful of gold. Tomorrow I'm buying it back. But don't misunderstand. The price must still be paid. For the next 3 days, the city's financial world watched in quiet horror as the Salway Group was systematically dismantled. It wasn't a noisy, dramatic collapse. It was a silent, bloodless suffocation. First, their primary credit lines with the city's 3 largest commercial banks were frozen, the bank managers citing internal risk reassessments that had been triggered by a single memo from the Smith Group's investment board. Next, their shipping contracts with the Rogmeyer Logistics Network were cancelled due to technical restructuring. Within 48 hours, 40% of the Salway Group's inventory was left rotting on the docks of the Northern Harbor, with no carriers willing to touch them. By the 4th morning, Edmund Salway sat in his private office, the desk light casting long, dark shadows across his face. The phone on his desk had been ringing continuously for 3 hours, creditors demanding immediate repayment, board members offering their resignations, and suppliers notifying him of contract terminations. The door to his office opened and Brett walked in. The younger man looked like a ghost of his former self. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his eyes sunken and bloodshot, the bruise on his cheek from Edmund's slap now a dull, sickly yellow. Uncle. Brett's voice was hoarse. The bank. They just called. They're foreclosing on the family mansion in the suburbs. They said we have 72 hours to vacate. Edmund didn't look up from his desk. His hands were clasped together, his fingers white from how tightly he held them. The Smith Group bought our debts. Brett. All of them. Every mortgage, every commercial loan, every supplier line. Kieran Smith owns everything we have. How? Brett cried, his voice rising in panic. How did he get this much power? He was nobody. His family was dirt. He was working 3 jobs just to pay for his college tuition. He left the country 8 years ago, Brett, Edmund said, his voice flat and empty. He went to the Eastern Capital. He started a micro-investment fund with Mr. Cooper's predecessor. Within 4 years, he had acquired the majority share of the Rogmeyer Group. Smith Hot Springs Club is just his hobby. He holds the strings to 70% of the shipping lines in this province. He finally looked up at his nephew, his eyes filled with a hollow, dead resentment. You wanted him to bark like a dog, Brett. But now, we are the ones who will have to crawl. The phone on the desk rang again. Edmund picked it up with a shaking hand. Salway. Mr. Salway, Reagan Judd's professional, freezing voice came over the line. Mr. Smith has agreed to see you. Tonight. 8 o'clock. Room 308. We'll be there, Edmund said, his voice cracking. We'll be there. Bring your nephew, Reagan added before hanging up. The rain had returned to Riverton, a steady, cold drizzle that turned the hot springs of Smith Club into a field of dense, white steam. Room 308 was completely dark, save for the soft, amber glow of the fireplace. Kieran sat in the large leather armchair by the window, wearing a clean dark gray wool suit that looked simple but fit him with absolute perfection. He held a glass of clear water in his hand, his eyes watching the steam rise from the pool below. The door opened, and Reagan led Edmund and Brett into the room. Both men stood near the entrance, their heads bowed, looking like criminals, waiting for their sentence. Brett's knees were shaking so badly he had to lean against the doorframe to keep from falling. "Sit," Kieran said, not looking back. Edmund slowly sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands resting on his knees. Brett remained standing, his eyes fixed on the floor, his face pale and wet from the rain outside. 8 years ago, Kieran said, his voice carrying a soft, clinical detachment. "You made me drink a bottle of cheap wine in the dirt outside the university gates. You told me I should thank you, because otherwise, I'd never have the chance to drink something so expensive." He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes locking onto Brett's face. "I didn't hate you for that, Brett. I really didn't. In fact, I should thank you. If you hadn't shown me how easily money can crush a man's dignity, I might have remained a simple scholar. I might have lived a quiet, ordinary life, and never realized what it takes to survive in this world." "Mr. Smith." Brett's voice was a cracked, wet whisper. He dropped to his knees, his hands clutching the edge of Kieran's mahogany desk. "I'm sorry. I was young. I was stupid. I didn't know who you were. Please don't ruin my family. My father. He has a heart condition. If he loses the house." "Your father knew about the Garcia family's mortgage," Kieran said, his voice completely flat. "He knew you were using that debt to keep Zyla in your house. Like a trophy. He didn't stop you then. Why should I stop now?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thin, leather-bound folder, tossing it onto the table between them. "This is the deed to the Garcia estate," Kieran said. "And these are the debt transfer documents for the Salway Group. If you sign them, Edmund, the Smith Group will absorb your company's liabilities. Your father keeps his house. Your family keeps enough shares to live a quiet, modest life in the suburbs." Edmund's eyes lit up with a sudden, desperate hope. He reached for the pen. Reagan presented. We'll sign immediately." "But," Kieran cut in, his voice dropping to a whisper, "there is a price." He looked at Brett. "Brett," Kieran said, "I want you to do what you asked me to do 8 years ago." He signaled Reagan, who stepped forward and set a heavy, unlabeled green glass bottle on the table. It was filled with a thick, dark, and incredibly cheap vinegar wine, the exact brand Brett had used to humiliate him all those years ago. "Finish it," Kieran said, his eyes cold as midnight stone. "Every drop. On your knees. And then you can leave." Brett looked at the bottle, then at his uncle. Edmund didn't look back at him. He was already signing the transfer documents, his fingers flying across the paper as if his life depended on it. With a shaking hand, Brett reached for the bottle. He uncorked it, his eyes filling with tears of pure, unadulterated humiliation, and dropped to his knees on the cold, hardwood floor. The acidic, burning smell of the cheap vinegar wine filled the room as Brett tipped the bottle back. He drank frantically, the dark liquid spilling over his chin and staining his white shirt, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. Between gulps, Kieran watched him in silence. He didn't laugh. He didn't sneer. He didn't feel the rush of triumph he had once thought he would. He only felt a sudden, profound tiredness. "Mr. Smith," Reagan murmured, stepping up to his side as the final drop of liquid fell from Brett's shaking hand. "The transfer is complete. The Salway Group is officially a subsidiary of the Smith Group." "Good," Kieran said, standing up and buttoning his coat. "Edmund, take your nephew and leave. I don't want to see either of you in this city again." Edmund stood up, clutching the signed copies of the agreement, and practically dragged the semi-conscious Brett out of the room. The door closed behind them, leaving only the quiet crackle of the fireplace. Kieran walked out of the room, heading toward the private terrace overlooking the hot springs. Standing by the stone railing was Zyla. She had changed out of her expensive silk dress and was wearing a simple, dark wool coat, the kind of coat she used to wear when they were students. Her hair was pulled back, her face clean of makeup, looking pale and quiet in the damp evening air. "The debt is settled, Zyla," Kieran said, walking up to stand beside her, his hands tucked into his pockets. "Your family's estate is secure. The mortgage has been cleared." Zyla looked at him, her dark eyes filled with a complicated, aching regret. "Thank you, Kieran." "You don't have to thank me," Kieran said, his voice flat. "It was a business transaction. Nothing more." Are we really nothing more than business now?" she asked, her voice cracking as she took a half step toward him, her hand reaching out as if to touch his sleeve before freezing in the air. Kieran looked at her hand, then up at the dark, rainy sky. 8 years ago, Zyla, I would have given my life to keep you," he said softly. I would have crawled through the mud of this city just to make you smile. But when you walked into Brett's car, you took that boy with you. He died on the road to the airport. He turned to look at her, his expression entirely calm, entirely indifferent. The man standing before you now is Kieran Smith. He doesn't need a campus belle. He doesn't need a first love. He only needs the market to remain stable. A single, silent tear rolled down Zyla's cheek. She knew he was telling the truth. The boy who had loved her was gone, and no amount of gold or power or regret could ever bring him back. Goodbye, Kieran, she whispered. Goodbye, Zyla, Kieran said. He turned and walked back into the warmth of the club, his footsteps steady and unhurried, leaving her alone in the quiet, empty mist of the hot springs. 3 months later, the winter had arrived in Riverton, the first snow of the year falling in soft, silent flakes over the stone roofs of the Smith Hot Springs Club. Inside the private office of the Smith Group's new headquarters, the air was warm, smelling of pine and fresh coffee. Kieran sat behind his large mahogany desk, reviewing the quarterly reports for the Northern Shipping Lines. The integration of the Salway Group's assets had been completed ahead of schedule, and the Smith Group's market share had risen by 15%. The door opened, and Reagan Judd entered, carrying a small, neat folder. Mr. Smith, Reagan said, placing the folder on the desk. The Garcia family has finalized the sale of their estate in the suburbs. They have relocated to a quiet town in the south. Ms. Garcia has taken a position as an English teacher at a local preparatory school. Kieran looked at the folder for a brief second, then nodded slowly. Good. Ensure their pension funds are managed securely through our secondary branch. Already taken care of, Reagan smiled. Also, Mr. Cooper has arrived for the year-end board meeting. He is waiting in room 308. Kieran stood up, straightening his collar. He walked over to the window, watching the snow blanket the city below. The scars on his knees didn't hurt as much when the weather was dry, and his voice, though still raspy and low, carried a firm, unmistakable weight. He had built his own empire on the ruins of his past, and the ground beneath his feet was finally solid. Let's go, Reagan, Kieran said, walking toward the door. We shouldn't keep our guests waiting. As he stepped out into the hallway, the light from the chandeliers caught his dark hair, casting a long, steady shadow on the wall behind him, a shadow of a man who had walked through the dark and finally emerged into the quiet, clear light of his own winter.